justice system that we long held up as a remedy to the abuses that plagued overseas detention. And this was a learning process for us, to learn from the prisoner rights movement and the abolition movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, who talked about, the importance of racism to a system of mass incarceration, and advocates around solitary confinement and so forth. So through a learning process, we saw that the connections were in fact quite profound. And if you pay attention, there's evidence of them every day. And just 2 days ago, the New York Times reported that in that upstate prison where those prisoners had escaped, guards brutalized other inmates who had no knowledge of the escape. And then the biggest brute was this unnamed guy they called Captain America, because he had a Captain America tattoo. And at one point he put a hood over a prisoner's head and threatened to waterboard him. Okay? And then it sounds like a scene from the Salt Pit or Guantanamo or wherever black site in Poland, and you realize that there's a kind of transit in the mindset and technique of torture that travels overseas and back home and overseas again. The same day, the New York Times talked about a judge allowing a class action suit to go forward in a southern prison where the prisoners were saying because of substandard health care and substandard food and inadequate efforts to protect them from other inmates, there was a violation of cruel and unusual punishment. And one complaint is that prisoners would languish for days, weeks, or months in darkened cells because they couldn't fix broken light bulbs. And it makes you think of the manipulation of light and sound and heat and cold that's part of enhanced interrogation. And then whether these are deliberate techniques of torture or cruel incompetence, it points to the pervasiveness of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment throughout the entire prison system, domestic and, overseas. And we've tried to sort of study these connections, sort of big or small, and try to understand them as part of a deeply corrupt and unjust penal regime that really is the great disgrace of America today, among many disgraces. Solitary has been important in the life of many groups and movements. It's been important for witness as well. And then one thing to underscore, in 2012, there was a massive hunger strike at Guantanamo, where folks protesting their indefinite detention went on a massive hunger strike, and they got attention in the media and from government, again, to their sad plight. And around that time, inspired by their protest, in part, inmates in California in the thousands engaged in a hunger strike to protest prolonged solitary confinement. And there's an activist in our group, a guy, Andres Thomas Contreras, who went on a hunger strike for 110 days. And then a few other people went on hunger strikes of nearly 100 days. And then 5 separate times he was nasogastrically fed, i.e. mock force fed, in front of the White House embassies in Latin America, as an expression of solidarity both with the men at Guantanamo and with the men in California. And I just wanted to acknowledge and honor what was a grueling several months in the lives of this extraordinary guy who, representing many people, put his body on the line in a really, profound way. And then, Witness continues to learn about parallel struggles, chiefly from the Black Lives Matter movement. Accept the leadership of movements led by other people, take seriously our responsibility to speak out against racism as whites, take seriously our responsibility to examine privilege in our own organization and community. And then I want to close by leaving you with 3 thoughts. And then the first is to say that this is, tough and at times like incredibly thankless work. When we started this, nobody thought that 10 years later we would still be protesting the existence of Guantanamo. But victories are possible and they happen. And as I hope most of you know, it was announced recently that the United States, fingers crossed, is going to release Shakir Amr, who's the last UK resident at Guantanamo, a man who has suffered, unspeakable abuse and became sort of a global cause célèbre because he, like the others, were suffering, and he's a particularly articulate, charismatic, defiant voice, that has sort of echoed globally. His attorney is here tonight, and we'll talk about that. And then he wasn't released because the U.S. government, the British government wanted him free. He was released because of the dogged work of his attorneys and thousands of advocates all over the country and the world, some of whom are here, who have hunger struck, held his banner, read his words, kept him in their thoughts. And then I want just a brief moment of silence to acknowledge the power of global solidarity and think of maybe something you did or something a friend did on behalf of Shaker, and just like be present to the kind of love that can help win a desperate man freedom. Okay, and then the second point is that I feel a bit like it's, deja vu all over again. 9/11 happens, the national security apparatus goes berserk. It's detain, torture, humiliate, degrade, dehumanize first. Ask, if at all, very basic questions. Do we have the right guy who's conceivably guilty of anything? Have we followed our own treaty obligations? Have we honored our own laws? Have we gathered evidence that's usable to provide justice if there's an actual perpetrator of 9/11? Like, all of that was thrown out the window. And the United States is still fighting overseas wars, dirty wars, and it's got boots on the ground in Syria, we now know, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. But in many ways, the battlefield has shifted to the homeland. And the lone wolf and the ISIS recruit is the new sort of face of terror. And then this is the chance to be worthy of the rule of law and execute real justice. But instead, you hear the same fear and hysteria compromising a justice system and locking up and throwing away the key for confused 17-year-olds who may have simply been exercising a federally protected right of free speech, but they become monsters because somehow it's ISIS. And I feel like as a country, we made a terrible mistake once again that we're going to pay for generations. And we're at risk of repeating that mistake. And that's why it's so important to talk about the domestic cases, partly because the nature of the battlefield has changed. And then the last thought is, like, imagine if there was a little bird in the sky and it saw this terrible building and it saw this beautiful group, but notice that it's like a small group. And it might be tempted to say, oh, that's so beautiful and noble that these souls on a increasingly cold night are standing with the marginalized and the abused and have the compassion to care about the people who are discarded and degraded, and it's lovely that there's people who care about the margins. And then I've never felt like this is a marginal issue, and I've never felt like it requires or should require any special compassion to care about this, because the stakes are nothing less than if this is actually a constitutional republic that enforces its own laws, honors its own creed, and treats people with the dignity that every politician claims is, the essence of the American ideal and what makes us, worthy as a people. And it's a trick of the media that we're in this lonely pursuit of justice on behalf of the dispossessed, and that we should worry about Clinton's email server, if Fiorina was a good or bad CEO or whatever, Kardashian tweeted. Okay, that itself is a trick, to believe that we are the margin, because what we're dealing with goes to the heart of the meaning of the United States. You could argue the Enlightenment more broadly, and you can argue the core values at the heart of every religion and philosophy that people pay any attention to. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Bardis. Thank you all, and I want to first express my personal gratitude to everyone at No Separate Justice, everyone who's been involved in Witness Against Torture over the years. I'm going to start by sharing with you the story of one of our clients at CAIR. CAIR is a project at CUNY Law School. We represent Muslim, Arab, South Asian, New Yorkers and members of other communities that are targeted by so-called counterterrorism policies and practices of federal agencies as well as local law enforcement agencies like the NYPD. This client of ours is a Yemeni American. He's He's a U.S. citizen, and like many U.S. citizens with roots overseas, he makes frequent trips to his homeland of Yemen. And on one of those trips, he was there with his wife who had recently given birth in Yemen. He did what many U.S. citizens overseas do when they have a child born abroad, which is he took that child to a consulate, a U.S. consulate, to register the child's birth overseas. A very routine consular thing that Americans do the world over and consulates the world over. But what happened to him was very different. It didn't go the way that it would have gone, say, in Germany or France. They locked him up in a room with his newborn baby girl. He didn't have a seat. He was aggressively interrogated and threatened for hours on end. He was not free to leave. He was told that if he did not sign a piece of paper saying that he was not who he said he was and his father is not actually his father, that unless he signed that piece of paper, they would put him in jail. He would never see his daughter and wife again. And this went on for upwards of 6-7 hours. So of course his daughter was crying. He didn't come prepared with food or diapers or expecting to be there for that long, and that kind of custodial and coercive situation. And in the end, I think he did what many of us would do, right? Which was get himself out of the situation the only way he could. Now, that is just one of many cases that have come up out of the Yemeni American community here in New York and elsewhere in California. It's by no means an isolated occurrence. The U.S. government then used that statement to say that he was not a U.S. citizen and to revoke his passport. You may wonder why this is at all relevant, why I'm telling this story here in front of this gathering or in front of that building. And the reason is that, the U.S. government does not see those two occurrences, the existence of that building and what happened to our client, as two separate and unrelated events. The U.S. government takes a very holistic and all-encompassing view of all of these policies. They are all connected as a single spectrum of policies that are intended to exclude, like what we saw with our client, incarcerate, like what you see in this building here, or even execute. And Pardis can tell you a lot about that, having represented victims of drone strikes overseas. And so that is a continuum to the U.S. government, and I think it behooves us. For that reason alone, it behooves us and the people that, we're standing here for to look at it that way. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom. We managed to push back quite successfully against the fact that our client's passport was taken away, and his dignity was that they tried to take away his humanity, his dignity, and even buildings as imposing and as impenetrable as this one are actually not impervious to expressions of hope and expressions of justice like this gathering today. And if that weren't true, if I were lying to you right now, then I wouldn't have been able to walk into that shack at Camp Echo in Guantanamo a week ago on Friday to tell my client, Shakir Amr, that he was finally going to go home. Earlier Jeremy was expressing thanks to the lawyers first and to people second, and I would like to reverse that, because I think the lawyers played their part, but it was because of gatherings like this one that grew into movements that we were able to finally put enough pressure on the UK government and the US government to make that happen, so that Shakir could go home and finally, hopefully in a month, he'll be reunited with his wife and his kids. But it's really gatherings like this in the UK and the world over that grew into real movements. And so I think I want to share with you some of Shakir's words. I mean, when I shared the news with him that finally the path was clear, that the Secretary of Defense had notified Congress that they wanted to transfer him back to the UK, that there was a 30-day waiting period which is supposed to end on October 24th. As of that date, hopefully he gets to go home. Initially he sort of sat there silently and then started to tell me about his prison shoes, about how he'd had the same prison shoes since 2010. He took them off he unraveled some duct tape and some it looked like a black garbage bag that he had used to sort of hold the shoes together. The shoes literally fell apart. So he's telling me about those shoes, and it's not for anyone who's represented anyone in any prison. It's not at all uncommon, and it's part of our job as lawyers to see what we can do to work with our clients and help them resist that additional form of humiliation and dehumanization. But it occurred to me that to him, the news was so massive after 14 years of an endless ordeal, that it just kind of went in one ear, out the next ear, and it was much easier for him to focus on something that he knew was concrete and real, the problem of these shoes in this prison. And so I had to stop him and say, look, listen to me very carefully, and to repeat everything I said before. And at that point, he said, wait, are you being serious right now? And I said yes. And that's when he smiled, and it finally dawned on him that there might be some light at the end of this long tunnel. And the first thing he said was, he expressed his deep, enduring gratitude to everyone, to all the people who protested on his behalf in the United States, in the United Kingdom, that sustained campaign for his freedom and the freedom of the other men. He never saw himself as disconnected from the other prisoners at Guantanamo. In many ways, he recognizes his own privilege because he is a former UK resident, whereas the Yemeni prisoners at Guantanamo don't have that additional card to play. But really, his first words were words of thanks to people like all of you. So I don't want to go on for too long, but I did want to share one thing, since Jeremy brought up the hunger strike. I represent another prisoner at Guantanamo, Mu'adh al-Alwi, who's a Yemeni national. He's been on hunger strike since February of 2013, and at 9 p.m. Eastern time, he'll be force-fed in a chair tonight. That's been his life since he decided to go on hunger strike to protest the fact and the conditions of his imprisonment. When I met with him at Guantanamo a week ago, he told me about a discussion he had with one of the prison guards, a 19-year-old white American male from the South, who accused him of hating Americans, of being an America hater. Now again, you can understand where that guard is coming from, right? Because he's young, he's impressionable, he's been brainwashed by his handlers at that prison. They've told him that these men are the worst of the worst, and that if they had a chance, they would kill him. So he looks at my client, and he doesn't see a human being, he sees a beast. And so he sort of launches that accusation at Mu'adh. And Mu'adh answers him. He says, well, why is it that you think I could hate Americans? He said, that person who, protested in front of the White House in an orange jumpsuit, that person who was force-fed in front of the White House in solidarity with me, was that person not an American? Knowing that, there's no way that I could hate Americans. And that was his answer. And I think that actually represents the view of most of the prisoners, because they have come to learn of gatherings like this one. They draw that distinction between what our government does and the fact that your actions here today speak to them loudly and clearly, and express to them loudly and clearly the fact that you reject what the government is doing. So I'm here mainly to thank all of you on behalf of my clients at Guantanamo, on behalf of the men that we've represented who have gone through places like this one, and on behalf of our clients who are experiencing other forms of exclusion and dehumanization, like our Yemeni American clients and everything they're suffering through today. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to talk a little bit about another man who's still being held in Guantanamo, one that's familiar to, I know, Witness Against Torture and many of you, a man whose name is Tariq Ba'ouda. Tariq is from Yemen, from a province called Shabwa. He spent much of his adolescence and early teens in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and he was detained in 2002. And he's been detained without charge at Guantanamo Bay since 2002, about 1/3 of his entire life. He was cleared for release by the Obama administration in 2009, but today, again in 2015, 6 years later, he remains held at Guantanamo. After years of enduring what Tariq himself described as merciless psychological and physical torture, he embarked on a hunger strike in February of 2007. That wasn't a mistake, 2007. to protest his continued indefinite detention and solitary confinement. He has been force-fed twice a day since February 2007. According to the government's own information, he currently weighs 74 pounds, which is 56% of his ideal body weight, putting him, as several medical experts familiar with facts about his case described, as on the precipice of death. In response to this, we at the Center for Constitutional Rights filed in June a motion requesting that the government, the very government that has claimed that it has been a priority to close Guantanamo, since President Obama took power, to grant his release on medical grounds. Now, this administration had the opportunity not to contest that, to oppose that motion. After all, they intend to close Guantanamo. So if Tariq is released by a court or by the administration directly, what's the difference? However, they opposed that motion, and there will be a hearing on his case on October 15th. Now, the reason I bring up these details about his case is I want to talk a little bit about echoing what Ramzi said and why this gathering really matters. I think Jeremy put it really best when he talked about, the people in that building that can very much hear what we're saying and know that we exist, and the strength that many who've been there have told us they've derived from that. It's actually not that different from Guantanamo. My colleague, also named Omar at the Center for Constitutional Rights, when he last saw Tariq in mid-August, he actually shared with him pictures of demonstrations that were held by Witness Against Torture, pictures of their solidarity fast. He shared with him tweets. He shared with him a Facebook post that showed solidarity with this case. And Tariq's reaction was of amazement. He told Omar that he thought it was so beautiful that people that have never met him, that have many things going on in their lives, took time to think about him. He was almost rendered speechless. And the value of that gathering really made a significant difference on a psychological well-being. So what I want to tell you is, it often is easy to feel powerless in our work. It's often easy to feel that we're fighting Goliaths and that nothing that we do matters, but it really matters. And I really do want to thank all of you, but especially Witness Against Torture, for all their work they've done. Specifically, let's take a minute to really give them a round of applause. And I want to end, the last idea that I want to share with you is about why your efforts also matter at this particular juncture politically. I actually made myself my first visit to Guantanamo with Pardis last month to meet two of our other clients at the Center for Constitutional Rights. And I want to share with you one reflection I had from what was really a very moving experience. Of course, I can't share with you anything that our clients said until it's declassified, because everything they say is presumptively classified. But I want to share with you an image that I think really encapsulates everything that Guantanamo is about. And that image is one of our clients when he spoke about, rephrasing my own self, one of our clients when he lit up with a look of hope, a look of imagining a future beyond Guantanamo Bay, where he really has known as his only home for much of his life. And then every time I saw that look, I unconsciously found myself peeking under the table at his shackled feet and thinking to myself that those shackles are there not because he did anything. They're actually there because President Obama didn't do anything. And it just struck me that the psychological torment, just imagine you're held somewhere for over a decade. And not only are you held there for that period of time, but you're told you did nothing wrong and that you're actually cleared for release. But you don't know when that could end. It could end tomorrow, it could end in a year, it could never end. That could be the place where your life ends. And the psychological torment of that. The fate is not in the hands of Tariq or the other men that are currently at Guantanamo. They're in the hands of people in Washington, D.C. But in reality, there's something we can do. We have more control. These men, in many cases, have fought through a system that is stacked against them day in and day out and have retained hope. But we do have a role to play. Going back to Tariq, the reason why, we know this from folks in government, that there were people in government that were actually trying to get the administration not not to oppose Tariq's motion, but their voice was eventually drowned out by others in government that have an interest in keeping Guantanamo open. If our voices can be louder, if we can continue, especially at this last year plus of the Obama administration, to keep the pressure up, to keep growing this crowd, to keep raising our voices, we have an opportunity to ensure that men like Tariq will eventually get the same news that Chakra received, and eventually, hopefully, will win their freedom. So thank you all again, and keep it up.
Yeah, now the last speaker will be Corinne Gatella Shapiro, who is a member of the Committee Against...
The Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement.
Yeah, and there's kind of like mixed news on this one, including some positive signs that you'll talk about.
Yes. Solitary confinement, as you've heard, is one of the ways in which the people in Guantanamo and in many of our prisons here in the United States are tortured. And in fact, it's a massive problem all across the country. I think the statistics say that at the present time, there are roughly 80 to 100,000 people on any given day who are in solitary confinement. Our group, the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement, consists of directly affected people, that is, people who have been in solitary confinement, as well as family members, and as well as advocates like me and lawyers. And we are fighting to change the way New York State does solitary confinement. But first I want to, since people have been talking about the power of organizing, I wanted to talk about a recent momentous victory that happened in California. Now, in California, where things were really horrible, in some ways worse than most of the others, for example, they would put people in solitary confinement because someone said they were members of gangs. And it could be based on some trivial thing, like someone having a poem. A Mexican poem would say that therefore he's part of a Mexican gang. Or he would have a book about the Black Panthers, and they would decide, oh, he's part of one of the black gangs. So these people would be automatically sent to solitary confinement, and unfortunately they would be given indeterminate sentences, which meant that for many of them they could never really get out. There were assessments every 6 years, but if someone saw a poem in your cell, that was enough to keep you in solitary confinement. Well, with the help of the Center for Constitutional Rights, they won this victory recently through a settlement in which gang validation will no longer be a reason you can be put in solitary confinement. There will be no such thing allowed anymore as indeterminate sentencing. And even the people who have continuous problematic behavior, such that they need to be kept apart maybe from the general population, will be put in special restrictive units that are not solitary confinement, but that instead will still allow participation in education programs, recreation programs, will allow them to be with other prisoners, and will allow them to have physical contact with their loved ones who visit them, which is something that is denied to most people who are in solitary confinement. So this was really a momentous victory for them. On the other hand, it has serious limitations. So, for example, it still includes the maximum sentence they can get to solitary confinement is 5 years. And the UN Rapporteur on Torture has made it very clear that anything beyond 15 days is considered torture. I believe that has even more recently been written into the standards on how prisons should be conducted around the world. Yet the United States clearly is not following those important recommendations. So what we're working on here in New York is an attempt to change the way solitary is done in our prisons, our jails, our juvenile detention centers, where people are also put in solitary. And the specific things that we have a law that we are trying to get passed called the HALT Solitary Confinement Bill. And HALT stands for Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement. And the particular features of that bill is: one, nobody gets put in solitary for more than 15 days. Two, nobody ever gets put in solitary confinement who is a member of one of the groups that are considered particularly vulnerable. And that means seniors, youth, anyone with mental, physical, or cognitive health problems, pregnant women, and members of the LGBTQ community. There is also a provision in this new law that would include, let me say one other thing first, that nobody gets put in solitary unless they've committed a really serious violation involving violence of some kind, or are really a threat to the safety of the community there. And then the other thing is building in a procedure such that anyone who is being put in solitary has the right to appeal, which I think they have now, except that the appeals now are heard by other guards, so they're somewhat meaningless. In this case, we're saying they can be represented by a lawyer or a jailhouse lawyer or somebody, or even a friend. Someone will help them fight and assert their rights. And that there will be a system of accountability and transparency that's connected with the way these procedures are done. So I guess I'd like to encourage you, in addition to participating in the No Separate Justice, I'd like you also to support those of us who are fighting to change solitary confinement here in New York. Thank you.
Just a note before we end, we're here the first Monday of every month at 6 p.m. So we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. If you can, bring a friend. Our website is www.noseparatejustice.org. You can read more about the cases that we're highlighting and the organization. So thank you all. Thank you.
Christine, please go ahead.
Okay.
See you.
There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. It's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow.
Thank you so much, Christine. And we're gonna close out now actually with just a poem and a song. And if I do want to hear, I know your presence has been really powerful and our speakers have been really powerful. And I want to take a second to thank those who have brought us together for No Separate Justice, for creating that space, right, for all the organizers each month, right? Sometimes I know it's getting chilly sometimes. We're out here and it's really frigid, and we've been through those times together, and just extra little bit of love for those people, for all of you who come out for that, and for continue to look at each other and support each other, and try to look through these walls and see our people and hold each other. Can everyone take 2 steps towards me? Thank you. There we go. So just to really solidify some of the connections that we've made tonight, the obsession with criminalizing and stealing minutes and hours of people's lives that happens by this government in this country and in other places in the world. I just want to hold all that terrible realities here, because we're really brave enough to do that. And so all the people that are locked up that can't be out here, right? All the people that are sick that can't be out here, right? Now there's so many good people that that have the same heart and the same dream that we do, of justice, of equality, of freedom. And I want to take a second to feel them here with us, right? So feeling the people that are on whose behalf we are here, right? And feeling all the people who are struggling for all sorts, right, of liberation in different ways and sizes and places, right, with beautiful human courage, because they're here. Can y'all feel that? Can y'all feel that? Yeah. We have to use that part of our imagination that helps us feel how powerful we are, how alive we are. So I work with young men who are mostly in jail because they're black, brown skinned, and because they're poor. I don't work with anyone. I work in the Bronx with young people who are locked up, specifically with young men, right? I don't work with anyone with money, and I don't, very rarely, with someone who's not black or Latino. And I want to bring them in as we've made this really powerful connection tonight. And this community is so precious in the way that it focuses on Islamophobia. And I want to share with you a piece that I wrote to them and for them, because well, let me just share the piece. This is all for you. When you locked up and hidden, I'ma call for you. I'ma smuggle in love through these walls for you. You overwhelmed because these prisons too small for you. And there's a world out there, and it's all for you. I know most days all we want to do is ball, my dude, but the hood's full of crack and we falling through. See, we could die, my dude, or we could rise, my dude. It's up to you, but you gotta be deciding soon. And I need you to know I see divine in you. I see God in you. I see a kid who's about to beat the odds in you. And it's time to pull up like sit-ups and finish your bit up. You've been a beginner, it's time to be bigger. Your mind getting fitter, you faster than Twitter. Imagine a world where you were the winner, where you were the writer, where you were the fighter. Imagine New York without no one at Rikers. Imagine the Bronx without no one to fight us. Imagine we righteous. Right here and right now, there is a world out there that's staring you down, and it's all for you. Good food, good love, and it's all for you. Good nights in the club, and it's all for you. The sun in the sky, the love in her eyes, this flow, this rhyme, and it's all for you. It is all for you. There is a world out there, and it's all for you. There's an old dude singing old tunes on the corner with his whole crew want to show you what life was like when he was so cool. You'd be surprised, but Big Bro could flow too. He'll tell you stories about the way it was, and it turns out he knows half your cousins. And every time you hear his mouth running, you just know this life is worth something. He's out here. He's up one of these blocks, right by the woman with the beautiful locks and the beautiful skin, and she's got a pool she loves to swim in. She can breaststroke and she can backstroke and she can freestyle, and that's facts though, because there's whole oceans out there. There's emotions bigger than scared. There's long rivers and small islands and good people who love smiling. I know you, bro. You love wildin'. Don't let them steal your free. Don't let them steal your free. Don't be silent. Your free mind is the real ride, because they can't buy it and they can't set it. So when you spit, you rebelling. I'm telling you to survive. What I'm telling you is survive. The real you that can heal you that you keep buried inside. Because that right there, that's real work. When you real mad and you real hurt, you want to burn this shit down and fight back, then love your brother because he's black. Or he's brown, or he's white, but he by your side and he down to fight for your human rights. I'm here to ask you to write. I'm here to ask you to fight. No closed fist and no dumb ish. Now I'm here to ask you to write. And I know I don't know your plight, but I know your soul's full of light. So write, brother, just write, brother, and we gonna be alright. Cause there's rooftops and there's sunsets. There's smart people and dumb sex. There's some regrets that are just worth it. There's real sweat from real working. There's satisfaction and love and action and hands to heal all the hurting. There's late nights full of laughter, and there's daydreaming about it after. There's books of words you ain't never heard, but you can still learn how to use them. There's clarity and confusion. There's soft skin and there's hot sand, and there's long trips across all lands. There's good music and traffic. There's heartbreak and there's havoc. There's some love that's so good that you'll start believing in magic. And it's tragic when you can't have it. And I get you getting mad at it. But the good news is that y'all cool, because real soon, that's all you. Only you can write your song. So write that shit down strong. You know, Destiny, she just called for you. She said there is a world out there, and it's all for you. Thank you. And I just want to say it's one of the most powerful things that we do, right? For the people who are locked up is continue to live, is continue to love, right? So that it's not just showing up, right? But it's the way we treat each other, right? It's the way we build, right? So thank you for the part of this revolution that we don't always talk about, right? Which is our kindness to each other, right? The courage to come out when you don't really want to, right? And it's the way you support each other and doing it the way that like everybody that organized that came, who brought this sign, who put it up, right? Who made this sign, right? But also, you know, who just said hello to the person they saw at the bodega who made, you know, this morning, right? So continue to be human, because that's part of our revolution too, right? That is so much of what keeps us strong in this, right? So, and for all those who are on hunger strike and in solitary confinement, I want to close with the song and ask you to sing with us. And the song says, I am not afraid, I am not afraid, I would die for liberation, because I know why I was made, right? Y'all are here because you know why we were made, right? Y'all do this work because you know why we were made. It wasn't for this. So let's sing this song together. I'm gonna ask my sister Mimi just to start it off. If you could.
I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I would die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I would die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. With joy, I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I would die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made.
One more time, real strong.
I am not afraid. No, I am not afraid. I would die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made.
Thank y'all for singing with us. Normally we close this vigil with a picture. Y'all have really powerful signs. And if y'all don't...
in the street?
Yeah, let's do it in the street. That's just, we're gonna have that building behind us, right? So we'll get the banner situated and line up behind the banner.
And these pictures often go to families of the incarcerated, and it means a lot to them. So if you have signs, we'll like set up.
Thank you.
Let's get behind this banner. We'll get behind this banner. Just go that way.
We're going to be in the demonstration.
If you want to be on this side with their sign on this side of the banner, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Same jacket. Yeah.
We got a couple. You good? Thank you, family. That was beautiful. Let's, we can wrap that up. Let's end how we started. I'll say we are. Y'all say powerful. We are. Powerful. We are. Powerful. Y'all say we love. Y'all say our people. We love. Our people. We love. Our people. Let's do it so the people inside there can hear us. We love. Our people. Say we love. Our people. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. All right.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know. Yes, we went out. Yeah.